We don't want to build our business on the hopes and dreams of potential referrals. We want to have a system for generating referrals, but we also want to have a system of consistent marketing that draws it in otherwise. And in these lawyer mills, we almost always know that they are not built on personal referrals because, as I said before, lawyer mills tend to be crappy lawyers, right? Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast, where today we are going to talk about the marketing savvy of lawyer mills. All right, so we're going to dive into this topic today. This is an interesting topic that came up in a discussion within the Essentials Plus membership here at Law Firm Mentor. So for those of you that are not familiar, Law Firm Mentor is a business coaching service of solo and small law firm attorneys, as you hear in the opening. And we have an entire membership that is dedicated to helping lawyers to start to get some of the fundamentals of business and even some of the higher level strategy of business under their belts before they dive into coaching. So our membership has a wide array of different types of lawyers, different practice areas around the country. And one of the things that we talk about in the community quite a bit is marketing. Right. So we have several different types of academies. One of the academies is the Marketing Academy. And one thing that comes up in the Marketing Academy a lot is how to get to that critical mass of people that you need without getting into the mentality of the lawyer mill. So what exactly is a lawyer mill? Well, we all have heard of it before, right? We have different names for it. I won't use some of the more colorful names for it on today's show. But I think what we all know of as the lawyer mill is basically these large shop of relatively unimpressive lawyers, right? It's like a huge conglomerate. Somebody referred to it once as where legal talent goes to die. And I think that's a bit extreme and a bit harsh, but we know what it is, right? It's basically, John Doe starts a law firm and it becomes the Doe firm. And the Doe firm becomes known as hiring a lot of lawyers and just cranking out the cases, right? They just take in case after case after case after case. They are not particularly talented lawyers, or at least they aren't able to display their talent because their goal is kind of like to treat them and street them, right? We've heard that phrase before. You go to the hospital. If a person doesn't have insurance, your goal is to treat them, i.e. get them to the point where they're stable, and street them, i.e. kick them out. And that's the idea of a lawyer mill, right? You're taking in cases just to do the minimum and get the case over with. Collect the dollars, get it over with. And it's not really about the highest level of service to the client. It's not really about doing the best job. It is really about making the most money as fast as possible that you can off of a file and then getting out of it. And a lot of these cases are the cases that are probably one step above the paralegal as lawyer mill places, right? There are a lot of billboards that you can drive around and see paralegal services being delivered to different populations, some for divorce, some for immigration. I've seen it for real estate, where a paralegal is essentially parading around the unauthorized practice of law. They don't call it that. They say they're just doing paralegal services, but they're giving legal advice. They're creating strategy. They're creating forms for people. And it is a fast and cheap, quick and dirty way of getting whatever legal service is being offered. Well, they have a step above that in the lawyer mill. And the lawyer mill are these places where people are responding to what is a legitimate need, right? The need for legal services in our society. And not everyone can afford the $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 legal service. So this is usually a lower cost service. It isn't always. Sometimes you can find a lawyer mill that cranks out the cases for higher dollars. But a lot of times the reputation of the firm becomes, this is where you go when you don't have a lot of money, but you need a good enough service. And so a lot of times they are responding to the needs of either the working class or lower middle class, or even what's now referred to as middle class, because if there is such a thing as our middle class in our current economic climate, The middle class is really one paycheck away from financial ruin. And so those are the folks that can eke out the money for the retainer, but oftentimes nothing else, or can eke out the low flat fee, but oftentimes nothing else. Right. And so the lawyer mills are thought to serve a lower economic station in our society. But whether they do or they don't, whether they have lower income folks or even some moderate income folks or folks that just have low asset wealth and don't have the ability to draw upon their wealth to pay legal services, they are usually a high volume shop of lawyers. And the lawyers are known for treat 'em and street 'em. They're not known for intricate legal thought, for complex litigation, for providing the highest service to the client. So now that we know what they are, let's talk about their marketing. Now, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because a lot of people, when you bring up what a lawyer mill is, they would say, oh my God, I would never want to become that. I want to be known for the talent that I provide. And little segue here, I should note that I have been a certified matrimonial law attorney in the state of New Jersey. I have been a fellow of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. I have sat on the matrimonial committee for our state, which basically is a Supreme Court appointed position where I had to evaluate the ethics and legal knowledge and skill of people who wanted to become certified. Now, I say that not to boast on myself, but to impress upon the audience that I actually do care about legal ethics. And it's important to me that we are good stewards of the entrusted, position that we hold as members of a profession, and a profession that is required to self-police. So I don't suggest that anyone should want to create a lawyer mill, or even that one should copy and paste the model of a lawyer mill and call it something else. I think it is important that we recognize what a lawyer mill is. And part of the reason why I think it's so important is because lawyer mills can teach us something about legal marketing that most other law firms can't. When you think about how a lawyer mill evolves, what tends to happen is kind of what I said before. John Doe starts a law firm and it becomes the Doe firm. And the Doe firm is initially John Doe, but then very quickly it's Doe and Associates, right? Whether John Doe changes the name of the firm or not is irrelevant, but it becomes John Doe, the named principal, and others. And then it expands beyond that. And for a lot of lawyers, a lot of very talented lawyers, there's a level of frustration and often jealousy about the John Does of the world, right? There's a question of, well, I'm talented, capable, I care about my clients, I care about getting a good result. I'm candid with the court and with my adversaries. I approached every case that I have ever had and will approach every case that I ever have in the future with a level of integrity and honesty and high ethics. And then here comes this schmuck who is just out for a buck. Oh, I didn't mean to rhyme, but that rhymed. That's kind of cute. But this person is out for $1 and they don't really care about the client. They don't really care about the profession, and they don't really care about being honest and of high integrity. And why is that person being rewarded, right? Oftentimes what I think gets lost when we think about law firms, right? We are still a profession, but we are in business. If you own a law firm, you own a business. And as with all business, the quality of your business, the quantity of your business, let's start there. The quantity of your business is a direct reflection of the quality of your marketing, right? No matter how exceptional your service, if no one knows about it, you're not going to do very well in growing a large business. Even those of you that pride yourself on personal referrals, okay? And I love personal referrals. Personal referrals are hot traffic. They are the easiest to sell to because these people are already bought in because they buy in to the recommendation of a person who referred them to you, right? So it's great to get personal referrals. But if all you are doing is waiting for people to become raving fans and hoping and praying that they send people your way, and even if you're seeing that, right, you can have a 7 or 8 figure company built on personal referrals. It is still not anywhere near the scope of your opportunity if you are only getting business through personal referrals. But you can absolutely build a business that way. The thought, though, that I want you to retain is that you are missing opportunities if all you are doing is waiting for personal referrals. And not only are you missing opportunity, you're putting yourself at risk, because what a person chooses to do, whether or not a person is going to encounter someone who needs the type of service that you sell at the time that you need a client, is a crapshoot, right? It's a hope strategy, and we all know that hope is not a strategy. So we don't want to build our business on the hopes and dreams of potential referrals. We want to have a system for generating referrals, but we also want to have a system of consistent marketing that draws it in otherwise. And in these lawyer mills, we almost always know that they are not built on personal referrals because, as I said before, lawyer mills tend to be crappy lawyers, right? It tends to be that, and this is somewhat of an overstatement, right? It's not always that the lawyers there are crappy. Sometimes you have legitimately decent lawyers that go to lawyer mills, and perhaps over the course of time, because lawyer mills are able to do the minimum with the maximum profit, oftentimes these are business-oriented people who will start and scale these lawyer mills. Right? Oftentimes, they have the resources to then go buy themselves some mediocre talent, and then that mediocre talent receives less compensation, creates more profit, and then they're able to go buy themselves even better talent and so forth, right? That oftentimes happens in the course of the trajectory of a business, right? The business starts out and the business is delivering wonderfully off of the owner because the owner has a passion for whatever he or she is selling. And then you start adding other people, and you can't add people at the top of the food chain unless you can afford them. Now, that is somewhat of a limiting belief, by the way, because what I always tell people is if you hire a person that's high up the food chain, you oftentimes get somebody who can pay for themselves and others because of the rate at which you can charge for their services and the extent to which they will save you time because they know what they're doing and you're not training up baby. Okay. But put that aside. Most folks start with that limiting belief. I have to hire the least expensive person I can so I can get as much money as I can to get going. And then you kind of step it up in quality as you get going. But a lot of times the lawyer mills can only step up so much because they get a reputation for being a lawyer mill. And lawyers with great reputations don't want to work at a lawyer mill. They want to work at a good firm and they want to associate with other good lawyers. So sometimes the lawyer mill kind of gets stuck in mediocre, and that's pretty much all that they can crest. But ultimately, what they teach us about marketing is that once they get enough resources, they oftentimes will then switch into a strategy of either digital marketing or some other form of marketing that can bring in a high volume of people at a low cost, whether it is a speaking strategy, right? We've talked a lot here at Law Firm Mentor about speaking as a strategy. That was absolutely how I built my career. I got really good at conveying really complex information very simplistically in a way that was entertaining and engaging. And I got myself on stage and did that over and over and over again, with always a request for people to contact me for help and or send referrals, and they did. And that's how I grew myself into a seven-figure entity without any paid advertising, right? But ultimately, whether you're using speaking, whether you are using speaking or you are using digital marketing or using some other platform, right? I know folks that built their careers by writing. They write articles and they disseminate them with a request for a referral, right? They go to trade shows and they connect with people who are industry partners, and then they create collaborative cross-referring relationships that are sustainable or even exclusive cross-referring relationships with other entities. So there's lots of different ways to build a business. But if you're building a business through marketing and you're pumping the money into the marketing, oftentimes what you're able to do is grow by critical mass in a way that the person who is much more resistant, waiting for referrals, or even putting just a little bit of money to try it out and test and see, it's just not going to be able to create. And for a lot of times, you have to keep in mind, lawyers by nature tend to be skeptical people, right? We tend to want to try and test things. We want you to prove it to us that this is going to work. We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. we are oftentimes highly risk averse as a category of people. And so when you think about that avatar of human, that law firm owner oftentimes encounters the desire to step in the direction of what works, try and see it worked. Okay, great. Rinse and repeat. Get a little bit more of it. Try and test, see what works. Rinse and repeat. Right. And they're slowly stepping their way into success rather than scaling their way into success. Because the person who has the lawyer mill mentality, and this is something that we can take away as a positive from the lawyer mills, right? The person with the lawyer mill mentality says, growth by any means necessary as quickly as possible, right? Growth. How do we achieve growth? Through marketing, right? So we got to market by any means possible, right? So they look for the fastest, easy, predictably repeatable way. And that tends to be digital marketing, but not universally. And there are other ways, right? So they'll go that route. And then as quickly as possible, that means buy your way to the traction that you want, right? Try to, as quickly as possible, figure out what works and then just 10x the investment or 20x the investment. And in many ways that works. Now, that doesn't always work because you have to consider, depending on where you're located, right? This is a digital marketing SEO, footnote. Depending on where you are, there might be only so much capacity you can buy, right? There's only so much available search traffic that you can buy. So even if you're willing to 20x your investment, you can't because there's only so much available investment to buy. There's only so much traffic there. And you have to think about what keywords, and only so many keywords would be available or might be trending in a particular area at a particular time. So, footnote, you can't just write the largest check and arrive. But there is something to be said for pouring all of your checks into marketing. And that is definitely a strategy that many lawyer mills use. And what they say is, growth is the most important thing. And so that will be the priority that we put over everything else. So that means growth gets put over the quality of the lawyer that we hire, right? If on a scale from 1 to 10, I have to have a 10 lawyer, there's going to be fewer of those than if I have to have a 2 lawyer, right? In fact, if we just think about it, I want you to think about the bell curve, right? Over here, you've got the 1, 2, maybe 3 lawyer. Over here, you've got the 8, 9, 10 lawyer. And then you've got a stratification of lawyers in between. Well, here's the thing. The higher up you go, the more you're going to find up to a certain point. Now, when you start getting into the exceptional range, those 8, 9s, and 10s, that's when you're probably going to see a drop off of what's available. But in the middle, right, those 4, 5s, and 6s, you're going to find a glut. And if you're willing to hire the glut, if you're willing to have people that are not exceptional, people that are getting the job done, you're going to have more opportunity. The lawyer mill lawyer says, you know what, by any means necessary. Who do I need to hire? A lawyer that's willing to bill X dollars or X number of hours that I can pass on to a client at Y dollars in order to generate for me Z profit, right? It's not rocket science. And if you're not billing by the hour and you're billing by a flat fee, it's the same general thing. I'm going to hire a lawyer. I'm going to pay them a certain salary to crank out between taking in and closing out 50 clients a month. I don't know what the number is, right? The number is high. It varies from firm to firm, but a certain number of cases, a certain number of flat fee cases per month. That means they're only going to be able to put in a certain number of hours. And if they put in more hours, that's on them. But I want a certain number of cases open and a certain number of cases closed. And that is the metric against which I'm going to measure them. And I can tell them, generally speaking, if this is the number of cases you're handling, you're going to have 10 hours a case each month, or 5 hours a case each month, or 2 hours a case each month, whatever it is. If you choose to do more than that, that's good for you, but you're not going to be compensated anymore, right? You have to do the minimum, and here's what the minimum is, right? They will write it out. Sometimes they will have something as detailed as a process around it. Many times not. Many times it's just by culture and what you learn when you get there. But there is a do the least for the most mentality. And here's the thing. That is not inherently wrong. Doing the least for the most, as long as you are serving the client, produces for the client the desired outcome, right? They're getting the number of hours, the level of service that is required in order for their matter to be handled effectively and for them to get what they want, or at least get the greatest likelihood of getting what they want. And you are getting the greatest profit, i.e., you are making the most return on your investment in the client of taking that client over another client, which is one of those factors that we have to consider when we file an application for legal fees, right? What do you lose by virtue of taking this client? Did you have opportunity to take other clients that you didn't take or couldn't take because you're serving this client? The answer almost invariably is yes, right? So there is a value to being able to maximize profit because, in theory, I say in theory, all right, stay with me here. In theory, if you are profitable, then you have money in the bank or money available to you in order to provide a better service to the client, right? In order to serve the client, you can bring the client into an office, sit them down at a ratty old table on a dirty, dingy chair, have them sign an agreement, and have them give you documents so you can get to work. Or the experience might be for them, they come into a beautiful, posh environment, a gloriously beautiful office where they are served coffees or teas of their choice. They are, seated at a beautiful marble conference room table with beautiful swivel chairs, and they are treated to watching television while they wait for you to come in for their appointment. When you come in for their appointment, you're able to spend a decent amount of time with them in order to collect their information, and then you are having them work with a paralegal to organize that information at lower cost to them than would otherwise be the case if a lawyer was doing that, right? So in theory, the more you make, the more you have to give a better experience to the client. Now I say in theory because in lawyer mills, the profit is oftentimes for the betterment of the owner, the owner, the principals, perhaps some of the more highly tenured managers in those types of companies, then it is to put it back into the client. But as a general rule, our profession wants you to have enough to be able to provide well for the client. That's what making money is about in a profession, right? You need to make not only enough to compensate yourself, but you need to make enough to be able to serve the needs of the client. So that is a goal. But the lawyer mills teach us that when we prioritize the profit of the business through being able to market to a high number of people to get a lot of folks through the door at the lowest price point, the highest price point for us, and the lowest economic spend on the client, we're able to make the maximum profit. And as long as you're not underserving the client, that's okay. I think the concern with lawyer mills that a lot of people will raise is that they're not really serving the client, which is its own problem. So we don't want to veer you off into not serving your client. But we do want you to think about what you can take away from those lawyer mills. And what you really should be thinking about is who they're serving, right? They're very clear on who they're serving. The multimillionaire is more than happy to walk in and more than willing to walk in and write their check, and the mill would definitely take their check. But they're not going to get the mill representation, right? The mill representation is very customized, very standard. It's a low investment of time. According to lawyers that work at lawyer mills, they'll say they're doing enough to be ethical. That's debatable, but they'll say that, right? And as long as you create that level of customization in your firm, you too can set your profit metric, right? For our flat fee lawyers at Law Firm Mentor, we tell them all the time, you should be deciding how much profit you want to make, which comes from you understanding how much time it takes to deliver the service and what you're going to charge for that service. And if you don't do that before you set your flat fee, you are almost always going to pull a number out of your tail, right? And just charge it to the client because it feels like the right number, and it almost invariably isn't. And it almost invariably reduces profit for the owner, right? It doesn't overcharge the client. There are people that overcharge, but normally our flat fee lawyers are not overcharging. Usually they are undercharging and benefiting the client to the detriment of themselves. And you want to avoid that. So marketing appropriately to your ideal avatar is very much a part of the lawyer mill strategy, as is the customization, right? And a lot of times they will market that, right? They will tell you, When you come here, we know exactly how long it takes to get you from start to finish of this type of case. We know exactly what documents need to be filed in what order. We know exactly when to communicate with you and what in order to keep you informed. We know exactly how your system is going to run. And in certain practice areas, this is much more easily guaranteed than others, right? But, litigation can go off the rails no matter what type of case it is. You start out with a plan. And many times people anchor themselves to that plan, right? It is the consistency and stability of the message that draws in the client. The client thinks, oh my God, this is great. I know that I'm going to have a good experience, right? Because if nothing else, these people have their process dialed in and it feels good. Now, many people don't intellectualize that. It's a feeling state more than an intellectual state. So you have to think about what you're communicating and how it's landing. And oftentimes you're not going to get that verbal feedback of the reason I chose you is because you got great systems and procedures. Even though there are some weirdos out there that do that. I will acknowledge myself as a categorical weirdo. As many of you know, I am engaged to the love of my life. Oh, my ring just slipped around. There you go. I'm engaged to the love of my life. And one of the things that we did when we were choosing a wedding coordinator is interview people. And I was very much about the process. Like he wanted to know, he has many different talents, but one of his businesses is photography. And so he wanted to know, what is the aesthetic you're going to give me? And what's the mood board going to be like? And how are you going to assist me with choosing the various different things to get this experience into one that is visually exciting? And I was very much like, what CRM are you using? And how are you going to keep me on task? And what's going to be the schedule? And how are you going to reverse engineer our success? And how are we going to create the budget? And ultimately, what happens when there are budget deviations? And, I wanted process. Because, here at Law Firm Mentor, we crush chaos in business and help people make more money. And that crushing chaos is about those systems. But most people are not going to go try to interview you as a lawyer asking about your system. They might want to know a little bit about the how. But for most people, they are trying to get to a level of, I trust the feeling that these people are going to be able to help me from where I am to where I want to be. And for Mills, they have usually dialed in that message, that marketing message that comes through in the sales pitch, that comes through in every piece of media that you consume, that comes through in paper advertisements, in pay-per-click advertisements, in banner ads. It's on the website. It's coming out of the mouth of the owner when he or she is on some type of platform promoting the firm. It is very consistent, and it's very much about, we got this dialed in from soup to nuts so that you can come here and know what you're getting for what you're paying. And that feels good to people, and it's very persuasive, no matter who the clients are. So I want you to think about that and take away from this episode that even though you might not desire to create a lawyer mill, you can very much learn from the ways that they market. Because what they are marketing to is the feeling state of their prospective client. And if you get people to feel good, they're more likely to buy. And if you get a lot of people to feel good about the same consistent message, that message is on autopilot while you are making sales in your sleep. And that is how those law firms of mediocre lawyers, oftentimes mediocre, not universally, but that's how those firms really scale, right? And if you're here to scale, you can scale quality the same way you can scale quantity. A lot of times people think, no, I'm going to have quality lawyers. That means they're going to be paid more. That means they're going to want more. That means they're going to do more. And I want my clients taken care of. You can absolutely create that at scale with the right marketing message. So I want you to learn from how the marketing mills do it. Take away what you can so that you can create the law firm of your dreams. All right, everyone. I'm Allison Williams. You are listening to another episode of Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor, and I will see you on our next episode.